Yeah, it's pretty good. I haven't been yet, but we open next Thursday. Next Thursday. Yeah. So exciting. Come on by. Have a drink. The space is really big too. So. Oh, that's really great. Yeah, I'm excited to see. And then I guess like Vector has to see. It's in the future. Yeah, it's still pretty far away. Yeah, this exhibition is taking a bit of precedent, and then we're taking. Yeah.
One, lapel 1, and lapel 2. Okay, great. Three and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. Okay. Okay, so
name is John Durno. I'm the head of library systems at the University of Victoria Libraries, where I oversee our computing deployments and infrastructure. I also have a strong research interest in digital archaeology with a specific focus on Telidon. I do see myself as being somewhat outside the mainstream of both.
Hey. Hey, how's it going?
Okay,
Good to see you. I'm just troubleshooting
Yeah,
the
yeah,
live
go for
stream.
it.
Okay, mic. Testing the mic. Mic test, mic test. Mic. Testing the mic.
I am here. Okay, and I am on screen, is that right? And on sound. Okay, hi everybody. This is a little bit weird and awkward for me since I'm talking to an air purifier, but I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And I want to begin by acknowledging the land on which you all are gathering and on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. I am joining you tonight from my childhood home, which is on the ancestral lands of the Wampanoag and Massachusetts nations. Today, these lands are still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and I am grateful to live, work, and have grown up on all these lands. To this institutionally sanctioned acknowledgement, I want to add that the Center for Culture and Technology is, in its small way, dedicated to reckoning with and dismantling the colonialist thought, practice, and institutional frameworks that continue to operate at U of T, in Toronto, in Canada, and across Turtle Island. In particular, in this space, we aim to address the settler colonial logics and practices that subtend contemporary computational media and culture and contemporary media theory. We do so imperfectly, but to the best of our ability. Please join us as we continue in this project. Now, these sorts of acknowledgements are habitual, mundane even. We settlers intone acknowledgements while forgetting their connection to the actual ongoing and urgent violence of settler colonialism. We must not allow the banality of this violence to make us numb to its effects, not in Toronto, and not especially when it comes to acknowledging the calamitous and ongoing violence of settler colonialism globally. I also thus acknowledge the settler colonial genocide taking place in Gaza, which has now been ongoing for more than 18 months. Genocide takes many forms, and in the academy, we must especially bear witness to the destruction of knowledges, archives, and universities, and the murder of academics, artists, journalists, and other keepers of knowledge. Settler states enact predictable but horrifying violence on their colonized populations and extract other kinds of costs from their settler subjects. Given the study of digital media in this space, we bear witness to the spectacle of genocide through digital infrastructures that are now our technologies of bearing witness. Moreover, digital infrastructures themselves are infrastructures for the military and other forms of violence endemic to settler colonialism. We have work to do to understand the ways digital media have become effective, logistical, ethical, military, and other infrastructures of colonial violence worldwide, and more work still to understand how to reckon with and dismantle those infrastructures. Thanks. And I think with that, I am turning it over to Shauna. Is that the next person? Ginger, okay. Thank you.
inextricably tied to Telidon. So for those who are not familiar, InterAccess is an artist-run center focused on new media art, purchase or they were gifted the Telidon machine.
It was like low.
It was like a
Yeah,
loan.
yeah.
So-
But like a big, it was, yeah, there were field trials.
a field trial. Okay, so
Yeah.
if you kind of so yeah, because InterAccess is so inextricably tied to Telidon technology, it's been a pretty amazing journey to kind of revisit the history and kind of re-foreground the artists that were working with this incredible technology, both in Toronto and across the country through this online exhibition. So it really spans, I guess, Turtle Island entirely. So I'm very happy to introduce the exhibition curator and project lead, Shauna Jean Doherty, to speak more about the artist, curatorial process, and project development. So I'll just read her bio and then pass it on over. So Shauna is a curator and writer who is interested in the social history of technology and the impact of the internet on art production and dissemination. Prior to Remember Tomorrow, and while in the role of she was program coordinator at InterAccess, Shauna curated The Future Before, an exhibition of the cutting-edge media artworks of late Nancy Patterson. Similar in spirit to Remember Tomorrow, the Nancy Patterson retrospective helped to resurface complex media artworks from the archives. So you definitely have a very strong interest in reviving things in the past using ancient tech. Shauna has curated exhibition screenings and events since 2009 in a variety of commercial, public, and artist-run centers, including the Art Gallery of Ontario, Arsenal Contemporary Art, V-Tape, the Centre for Art Tapes, Vivo Media Arts Centre in Vancouver, and the Museum of Vancouver. She is currently working on an exhibition that showcases the groundbreaking works of Canadian women artists who experimented with photocopier technology in the 1980s. And she also currently lives in Victoria and works at the University of Victoria. So please, yeah, take it away.
Hooray, hooray. Thanks, Jennifer. Oh, yeah. All right.
Okay, great. So you're just going to use that one.
Gonna clip this bad boy on. Okay, nice. Tangle. Nice to see everyone here. Thank you so much for coming. I did my undergraduate degree here at the University of Toronto in semiotic theory, which, Matt, which is a program that no longer exists because I think they determined that having a semiotics degree does not make you the most employable, but we're working it out. Everything's fine. So our game plan for today, I'm going to give a little introduction to the exhibition and do a walkthrough. We're going to watch some videos that feature some of the artists in the show, as well as John Durno, who restored the works for the exhibition. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with Scott and Matt. So, and we're going to do that all in one chunk, and then we can enjoy some crackers afterwards, which I know might be the highlight of the night. So I thought to start, I would read from the catalog. We did a physical exhibition of Remember Tomorrow in 2023, and that's what this catalog was produced for. Please feel free to take one. And since I took a red eye to get here from Victoria, I think it'll be more coherent if I just read this little summary, which will give us a snapshot of the history of Telidon and its associations with the Canadian government, how it all sort of came to be. Yeah, welcome. Okay, so if you will bear with me for a little reading. I read this out loud earlier today and I teared up, which I think is hilarious that I'm like so deeply entrenched in Telidon world. But hopefully this event will sort of extricate me from that intense association. Okay, so let's read this. In 1986, a small number of obscure, technically complex artworks were en route from Canada to Italy. They were bound for the Venice Biennale, one of the world's greatest recurring art exhibitions. Every other year, the major art event showcases ultra-contemporary works by artists from across the globe, capturing the political, social, and aesthetic concerns of the moment. In 1986, the exhibition's overall theme was art and science, earning it the sobriquet, the laser-friendly Biennale. which is our bread and butter. Selected by curator and artist Jeffrey Shea and founder, one of the co-founders of InterAccess, the in-transit Canadian techno artworks were created using a homegrown, cutting-edge information system called Telidon. Contained on a series of floppy disks and playable only using specialized hardware, they are considered today to be the country's first interactive networked computer artworks. In spite of this rich history, Telidon art, as a genre, is barely known even to the most zealous of contemporary media art enthusiasts. And I think we would count ourselves as zealous media art enthusiasts. These primordial digital works embody a critical beginning for both art and internet history. But due to the, quote, ever-present technical difficulties that accompanied Telidon technology, the artworks selected for the Biennale were never put on view and would be subsequently stashed away in a cardboard box for 4 decades. Developed in a research lab by the federal government's now defunct Department of Communications, the DOC, Telidon was designed to enable everyday Canadians to conduct a range of virtual activities, including banking, shopping, and learning from the comfort of their living rooms. An early trial, dubbed Vista and coordinated by Bell Canada, found the adult entertainment content to be particularly popular. The system's electronic pages could be accessed via specialized hardware, which consisted of a keypad and decoder that sat on top of a standard CRT TV, and was enabled by the technology's revolutionary ability to circulate low-resolution graphics over telephone lines. And I'll show you some photos of what a Telidon system looked like in the living rooms of Canadians. One of Telidon's most unprecedented aspects was that users could access the system's databases at any time of day, which stood in contrast to the passive consumption and regimented availability of conventional television programming. With its interactivity, round-the-clock accessibility, and infinitely varied content, Telidon imagined the graphical, functional, and virtual aspects of the modern-day internet, at least a decade before the World Wide Web. Telidon was mostly intended to produce images in a still format. However, as artists encountered its slow and sequential rendering speeds due to the limited processing power and network bandwidth of the early 1980s, they discovered its aesthetic and narrative potential. Taking advantage of the technology's limitations, artists created simple graphics that possessed animated effects and layers of text, shapes, textures, and punchy electronic colors. By drawing and redrawing the same shapes in different positions, when presented sequentially, the shapes would appear to move as the image rendered. And Doug, Nell, and Paul, you can maybe tell us a little bit more later about what it was actually like to create Telidon graphics, because it sounds a bit grueling. Yeah. But we're glad you did. From its launch in 1978 to its demise in 1985, when the Canadian government announced its divestment from the project, Telidon burned brightly, albeit briefly. Douglas Parkhill, one of the fathers of the technology, named a report chronicling Telidon's history, "The Beginning of a Beginning." It was delivered to the Canadian Deputy Minister of Communications in 1987. Fittingly, the title of Parkhill's account was drawn from a quotation by science fiction writer H.G. Wells, who declared, "The past is but the beginning of a beginning, and all that is or has been is but the twilight of the dawn," which was said in a lecture published in 1913 titled "The Discovery of the Future." So that's Telidon's history in a nutshell. And now we have this lovely exhibition that features the artists who were able to sort of hijack the technology and make some amazing art with it. And very happy to see you, Simon. Simon is responsible for the design and production of this big old website. So this is the landing page. It's kind of like awkward to show very technically inclined people what a website looks like, but this is how you use a website. I'll scroll down. Yeah, so here we have some of the featured works. This is Nell's work right here on the left, which we can look at a little bit later. And I'll launch into, I think John Durno is online in our live stream. And he was responsible for, as I said, restoring the works in the show. So he gave us a little interview to describe his relationship with Telidon.
My name is John Durno. I'm head of library systems at the University of Victoria Libraries, where I oversee our computing deployments and infrastructure. I also have a strong research interest in digital archaeology with a specific focus on Telidon. I do see myself as being somewhat outside the mainstream of both libraries and archives in doing this kind of work. I first got involved with Telidon in January 2015, and when I was asked to take a look at some Telidon materials that had arrived in our archives. It was in preparation for an exhibition of an artist named Glenn Howarth, who was a local Victoria artist, mostly a painter and drawer, but who had done a significant amount of Telidon work back in the early 1980s. When I first encountered Glenn Howarth's artwork, I was quite fascinated. I'd never heard of Telidon art before, and despite the fact that I had been a library technologist for almost 20 years at that point. Telidon had fallen so deeply into obscurity that it was a revelation to discover there had been an entire school of digital art that had existed in the early 80s that was specifically Canadian. I remember sort of reading histories of Canadian digital art that don't even mention Telidon. And yet, this is some of the first networked art that ever appeared in Canada, right? It's certainly the most sophisticated for its era. One of the great things about working with Telidon is that it presents a variety of really, really interesting challenges in the recovery and restoration of digital materials. This is a relatively new area in library and archival science. We're really just getting into the whole aspect of how do we make digital objects accessible for the long term. And Telidon is an almost perfect test case for this kind of work. One of the major challenges I found with working with Telidon art is the scarcity of the equipment that was available to work with. There weren't a lot of Telidon terminals made back in the early 80s, and very, very few of them have survived into a working condition in the year 2022. The word I would use to describe Telidon is ingenious. It was developed by remarkably clever people who were able to do very, very
Talking about networked stuff? Oh, it doesn't matter what John has to say.
sophisticated things with graphics encoding in an era when the technological limitations were extreme. I first got involved with InterAccess back in 2018 when I was asked to give a talk, Digital Archaeology, Excavating Telidon, during a 35th anniversary celebration of Telidon that was happening.
So he gave this talk. It was good. Okay, maybe while that's loading up, I'll just say that John is in possession of one of the last Telidon decoders that exists. So that's what made it possible for him to restore these works. And when we worked with a company called Retro Floppy in North Carolina, where we delivered them these 8-inch floppy disks, and they were able to draw out the files, but then John received them as these individual pages, and there was no sort of roadmap for how the Telidon works were supposed to be assembled. So he had to use sort of his like editorial, impetus to put the files into an order that made sense, that he assumed the artist would have wanted in cases when the artist wasn't available to give their input. But in other cases, with Paul and Nell and Douglas, they could tell him what the original artwork looked like. So that was very important input. Okay, let's see if John's final thoughts can be expressed.
The Art Center. So that was where I first met my future collaborators on the Telidon Art exhibition project and Telidon Art restoration projects, which has lasted to this day.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so maybe I'll walk through just to show you a little taste of what is enclosed in this exhibition. The What is Telidon page has a very fulsome timeline of Telidon Technologies' emergence, establishment, and then ultimate decline and death. But we're reviving it. We're reviving it today. So yeah, you can see the government's involvement, and then when artists took Telidon into their hands, there was like lots of archival materials that the government had produced that was like pseudo-propagandic materials promoting Telidon. So those were like very fun and hilarious to look through. There was like such an optimism about the potential Telidon had to change the lives of Canadians. They were just like, this is going to change the entire world. And then it, within 7 years, it was no longer funded and fell into obscurity. And I'll also add that a lot of these images are drawn from the library archives at the Science and Technology Museum in Ottawa, which is an amazing place. They have like a multi-football field sized repository of old technology. So I was able to like climb through that stuff with the curator, whose name, Tom Everett. He's the curator of technology there. And we were able to find some like old Telidon machines, and the library has what they call trade literature. So they keep materials related to any of the artifacts that they collect. So there was lots of Telidon related trade literature. All right. Yeah, and you'll see that Telidon was very present in like public spaces. So they introduced Telidon machines in malls, for example, to use as a directory system. It was also used at the Olympics in Los Angeles, which is pretty interesting that it sort of crossed the border in that way. John's talk in 2018. And then the physical exhibition we did in 2023, and now we're here. All right, so let's look at some art. All right, so we can start with Andrew Owen's work. Andrew Owens, as far as I know, is no longer with us. We were never able to connect with him. This is his very amazing work. It's very short, but I'm completely amazed he was able to put it together using Telidon technology. Also, Telidon art typically doesn't have sound unless the artist used it to put into a video and add a soundtrack. And I think in reality, as Paul and Nell, I think, pointed out recently, the loading rate of that, or how that work would have originally appeared, would have been far slower. Exactly. Yeah, I guess.
Well, this is not an emulator. This is video.
Yeah, but shot from an emulator. I guess it's just so powerful now, comparatively. Yes. Yeah, so it's kind of an unrealistic representation of what the original artworks were meant to look like. All right, so Paul, shall we look at your work to put you on the spot here? Yes, we have Douglas is here with us tonight. All right, and then, yeah, we can look at your video too, Paul. Okay, or do you want to give a little intro to this piece, or do you want us to just watch it?
Well, I don't know. I do have
Okay, okay, sounds good. And again, it renders far more quickly than the original did. And this piece originally was interactive. So you'll see a blinking arrow at the bottom of the page. And when folks were originally interacting with the piece, they would have been able to advance to the next page at their own pace. But here you're advancing at my pace, which is faster than a normal pace. Okay. Yeah. And we can play it slower. What do you think? Should we play it slower?
Play it to normal, just
Okay.
because that's, yeah, then I can comment on that too.
Okay. So My Medium Myself by Paul Petro.
That is fast.
So first of all, how long would that have taken you to make, Paul?
Well, I mean, each individual line was made at the start and end, and spacing them, and then making the two rectangles, typing, and like that all takes input time, and then layering those letters with black letters to make them disappear, and then just wind up with the kind of corrosion of the erasure of words, and just what you're left with, like making that absence visually palpable. Yeah, and then you're just thinking as you're doing, right? Like there are lots and lots of overlays to it. I was amazed that they survived intact, but I guess that was a consequence of file naming and that remaining consistent throughout the retrieval process. Yeah, and then like you were saying with the prompts, you could choose how long to sit with aspects of this, and I mean, back then we were thinking about access information and how accelerated it was even back then, which is nothing compared to now. But the idea of being inside the technology and slowing down within that acceleration, it's much more poignant. why when I was seeing it displaying, it felt like it was really fast because it's actually quite nuanced, and you access that and can appreciate that when you're kind of moving at your own pace, which was the case at InterAccess in the first iteration of the show. And I mean, but you know, I'm looking at something that I haven't seen for decades, right? Even reacting to the fact that it was, oh wow, 1984, what an interesting year in literary terms, as well as in pre-internet, you know, pre-web terms.
When I was recording it, I must have been going at like a millennial's pace. Like
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can barely remember how slow it displayed. Like it's coming back to me as we're talking, but it was dramatically slower. And but you know, back then we were just every line was so interesting to make and to ponder, really, because I mean the skill set I think which contributed to that was like Lego, and I'm not even kidding. Lego, because all the right angles, right, and colors. Lego, Etch-a-Sketch, because it was all verticals and horizontals, and a shape, a curve, and spirograph, right? And I mean seriously, for all the, you know, yeah, and you see spirograph emulated, I think, in the Nat Matrice work, as I recall, because back when I was making this work and showing it, I was also independently curating it. And I had what I called the electronic gallery, and it was loaded on the Department of Communications database, but unlisted. You had to know the number sequence to access it by phoning in, right, with your modem. I can remember in the lower level viewing room of the Art Culture Resource Center having a show there with you know, a selection of artists and the whole tree structure thing, and choosing, and that was a bit of, I think, that was a precursor to the Canadian Artists in Telidon tape. After having done that, and then just having this inkling that, you know, because it's not as if we were connecting with a large audience, but it was connecting with the potential of that large audience that had been, at that point, unrealized. But, you know, there we were all these independent information providers, right? And this idea of cottage industry, and actually being able to work at the cottage if you could, you know, get the equipment together to do all of that. Just how to connect with a larger audience, and so and just indulging wanting to put it to music, right? And so and then how to shoot it, like, because we were just making it up as we went along, but like when we shot the tape, there was this setup at Sheridan College where Robert Flack made his work, for instance, and there was this exterior housing that attached to the display monitor, and it was like 2 feet long, and then you had your camera to shoot it, and the camera's looking down that and capturing the image that way. I'm trying to remember if there was an exterior housing thing so that you could put your Nikon 35mm camera and take, because I ended up with a lot of slides in addition to shooting you know, the video and dealing with the roll bar effect and how to, you know, minimize that.
And that's probably why
on
there's
and on.
there's so little documentation of Telidon artworks in the form of video, because there was basically like one place that had the setup to be able to capture it properly. Did you have a question?
Well, I just, to be bold here and jump in, I'm a Telidon application developer back from circa 1980.
Oh, wow. Thanks a lot. Oh, cool.
And like the rendering stuff and so on. I think whenever you talk about Telidon's technology, you have to separate into one technology stream. Then the presentation stream, NLPLPS,
Mhm.
North American Protocol Presentation System, was a whole different stream, and they kind of, and then you had the computers that were feeding the content to the decoders. The decoders were dumb. They just took NAPLPS and rendered it. But the protocol included delay features and loop features, which was how a lot of the artists at Infomart would create animation effects. They'd send down a set of codes to create an image, then they put in a delay, and then they'd move it and show it again, show it again, show it again. And my specialty was generating all that stuff on the fly
Wow.
to do stock and commodity market graphics and teleshopping for the Hudson's Bay and that sort of stuff. So it was this whole interaction between the authoring tools and the presentation protocol and the computer systems that push the content out to the set top.
And where were those terminals? Where did they have the access?
Well, I mean, the access could come in several forms. The goal was to have a set-top box be the terminal, use the video capability and audio capability of the television, and then add a keyboard for interactivity, and then use your phone line to connect back to the computer.
Oh, but did that actually happen?
Oh yeah, but it never happened at scale. You know,
Right.
if you want to get into the hardcore,
Right.
it took the advent of higher speed modems, the personal computer with enough computing power to really drive the graphics, and cheap networking before it all came together in the internet. And I think the real child of this technology is actually Minecraft.
How topical.
There's a direct path through a whole series of technologies. I mean, and before that, this thing started with Minitel and Prestel and the so-called videotech systems in Europe, and then Telidon was a better version of that. Windows that came out of MIT used these architectural concepts exactly, which gave us high-performance graphics on Unix workstations, which then evolved into Windows, and there's a whole through line here, and I think the circle back is Minecraft, because the Minecraft architects said to themselves, let's prove that we can generate a compelling video experience without high-resolution graphics and without high-performance computing. And that kind of took it right back to Telidon, drawing little boxes. So, just to throw that out there.
I wanted to show these Telidon decoders that we are talking about. So this blue box would sit on top of just a regular television, ostensibly. But as you said, it never sort of entered into the mainstream of Canadian lives. It sort of died within the user testing phase.
A television with RGB input, though, you had to have, at least in my experience, you had to have a TV that had, do you remember that? You had to have like a separate
Oh,
inputs, yeah. Couldn't just have a single
so finicky.
jacket. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and the sort of like hardware versus content dichotomy is part of Telidon sort of failing, was that producers of the hardware didn't necessarily want to fully commit to manufacturing the hardware necessary to view the Telidon content before there was enough content to show, but the people didn't want to necessarily produce content if there wasn't the hardware for folks to view it. So that was a like internal contradiction that didn't help the proliferation of the technology. So yeah, we've come upon the archive page of the Telidon exhibition. So much of this material is from the Science and Technology Museum and is largely sort of promotional material related to marketing Telidon to everyday Canadians. We also have some slides here, thanks to Paul and his fastidious documentation of the sort of Toronto art scene for decades. We have records of shows like this. This was Art as Communications from 1985. which was held in which gallery? A Space?
A-Space,
Okay.
when it was on Spadina, next door to where InterAccess was.
Okay.
192 versus 196.
Okay. And this was one of the rare moments when an actually networked Telidon machine was in the gallery.
Well, not exactly. There were video. There was a 3/4 inch video playback unit in what was the living room. There was black masking tape that demarcated the living room, and in the kitchen there was a monitor with an EPS, and that was playing a piece. But it was more video based.
Okay.
Or standalone, was standalone.
Yeah, and people were helping
Decoders,
themselves
yeah.
or standalone. Yeah.
All right. A Telidon buffet.
Yeah. Oh, and this was in a group show that Nancy Patterson curated in 1986, and this was a work that was resurrected for the first iteration of Remember Tomorrow since '86 when it was first shown.
Okay. So now we'll move along to an interview that Nell gave us describing your experience of Telidon back in the day. If you don't mind us playing this video now, hopefully it will behave. I didn't even wait for your consent.
My name is Nell Tenhoff, and I'm an artist. I first got involved in Telidon in 1982. Oops.
I mean, you could also just tell us.
Yeah, I can't tell you. I don't remember what I said, except I was in Montreal, so I was quite isolated. I was totally isolated, is what I'm saying in this video. And I recount how, my DOC contact there, Mark Montour, my first name, set me up in this office space on St. Catherine Street, this totally weird, neutral, it was very strange, by myself, and I had the key and I could go in and create pages. I mean, I did work in other spaces as well that were more shared, but that was like the weirdest experience. But yeah, I can't remember what else I said. I mean, I wanted to comment about the network thing, that was, I only ever showed a work of mine once in a network context, and the rest of the time it was always standalone. I mean, you'd get basically the equipment from the DOC. I got the equipment from the DOC every time a work was shown anywhere. You had to do the formal request for, the loan of the equipment. But the network thing was a terminal at Sir George Williams. So that was running off a server at, I'm pretty sure, Université de Montréal, Centre de Calcul, if I recall. And so they would have been on the field trials. And so, at this terminal, you could see all the library information of Sir George and some health information from some other outfit. So there's a whole list of things. And then my piece, Santa Rodin. So that was weird, but cool, because it was a public terminal. But yeah, that was the rarity to have, to experience the networked access of it.
And
go ahead.
did you get the sense that your contact from the Department of Communications had worked with a lot of artists before, or were you kind of like a rare bird?
Well, I never was clear about that. No, I mean, they had worked with other groups. There was a group at UQAM, but the groups tended to be more like social issue oriented. For education or whatever. I think I was pretty rare as an artist. And there was also, though, you showed it in the timeline, an NFB project early on, but I think that was quite a lot earlier. And there was not really, a connection made to that.
Gotcha.
So I felt that through the whole thing. Until I came to Toronto.
Yeah,
I connected with this
and
group.
we invited Nell to
Yeah.
come to Toronto Community Videotex to give a workshop and a presentation of work and artist talk,
So that
whole thing. But we did have an arts and culture contact at the Department of Communications, that really,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, we'll watch a tidbit of your work, Shopping for Value Systems now. All told, the recording of the work is about 15 minutes long because there are so many branches. But Nell's work is like very demonstrative of that branching capability that Telidon had. And your work like really exploits
Well, somebody
that.
obviously told me about a database and what it is. And I went from there into the branching tree structure. I guess I'll put things. Oh, here we go. So this is. Oh yeah, here's the top of it then.
She had me at the title of this
Yeah.
piece, honestly. It's just,
Me and my irony. I can't help it. It's so sad. It's like it's hard to watch something that's so quiet. So this is. Can I talk over it?
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
Please do.
So this is the more kind of tongue-in-cheek, imagining a utopia side of the value system choice. So it's about Atlantis, and you even describe it really well in your blurb, actually.
Oh, thanks.
Whatever that said. So yeah, so you get these kind of and I was really interested in this notion of choices that are non-choices. I always thought, and it applied especially to the first piece that I did, which was really about, like, there is no choice. That's called Us and or Them. It was about the Cold War, about the sides of the Cold War. But I was interested in using this, this very long, going down a pathway and getting to the end and realizing that you've not gotten anywhere. So your choice has actually not led you to a fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's kind of the core thing that I was working with. Whereas the other branch is about China at the time. Yeah, but that is really awkward to read now.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I have.
I'm talking about China. Am I going to get in trouble?
And
So it's China in 1984.
let's see.
I was a Sinophile. I mean, I was interested in China coming out of the 70s, politically, my group of friends. And so that partially fed it. But by the time I was doing this, it was like watching the news to see how that was actually crumbling, the kind of utopic idea of China.
Just to understand this, so you would press one and then you would go on and you would go into something else.
Yeah, you go down a path, and I think you could always get out. I'm not sure about that. Does it say return? I thought you could always kind of.
You can go back to the
Oh, main menu. Yeah, you have to come back to a menu and then hit main menu and go back to the top of the tree. But it was this branch structure.
Okay, in the interest of time, I feel like we should hurry along here, and we'll look at Douglas Porter's work, who's also joined us. Oh, there you are. Hello. Douglas also gave an excellent interview, but let's not even try it.
You're online.
Ooh, that seems dicey. What about the live streamers?
No, just on my computer.
Oh,
There are multiple networks.
Yeah, which network is it on?
you seem really confident.
Because Coach House would be the better one to be on.
Okay, I'll let you take over, Matt.
Let me just see. My computer is not easy to use by anyone else.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just on YouTube right now. Coach House.
Oh, okay. That might work.
Let's see if it works.
So we'll look at Doug's interview, hopefully, and do a preview of your piece, Empty Objects. And then I think we should move on to our panel discussion since it's already 7 o'clock.
I have not been able to connect to Coach House properly. Oh,
We feel like we've come so far technologically, and yeah.
I know. And then all these things are popping up. Oops, okay.
It's a lot of
Typing it
pressure.
wrong. Yeah, I know. I'm live typing a password. really think I'm typing it right, but try one more time. If this doesn't work, I might just have to deal with U of T. Yeah, that's too bad.
Maybe reconnecting will give us
Maybe.
some new energy.
We'll see.
That's how it works, right?
Okay, Zoom can go away. All right, well, let's try it and see.
That didn't sound as optimistic as I'd like you to sound. Okay, we'll give it a second.
My name is Doug Porter. I'm an artist. I was working for the Nova Scotia government, Department of Communications. Along came this thing from the government where they said, we have this thing called Telidon. We want some volunteers who will be trained on it and then test it out and see how it works. So I said, yeah, please pick me. They let me stay after hours. So I thought, oh, well, I could make some art with this. This is new, this is different. It was given to me by the government. When I was first asked to be involved in this project, my response was, I thought, wow. You know, but then away it goes, right? It's a marketing tool. There was this sense that this was the cutting edge for right then. This was a new technology and we didn't know where it was headed, so we wanted to like jump in and explore. The main word I would use to describe Telidon is interactive. Being able to get input from the user where they can make choices as to what they see. You could develop a kind of voice and a relationship with the user. To me, there was a different level of playfulness that you could have. Gotta get their text in, gotta pull people through an idea, through a progression. It was designed to provide the text and visuals together. Artwork that I've done since then, in video and then painting too. Text and image together to play with each other or against each other, you know, create a tension. One thing I disliked about the Telidon was it was the serial drawing, that the image had to, by pixel, had to be put on the screen. But what you had to do was figure out how to work with it. So that if you had constructed an image, you designed it such that it would maintain the user's interest while it was being built. You choreograph it so that there's like a continual reveal. Trying to make sense of computers as an art medium and, you know, computer culture, that kind of thing.
Awesome. So I think we got a pretty good preview of empty objects in that video. So I'll encourage everyone to return to the site and look at Douglas's work in a more fulsome way. And then there's one final video I want to show, and then we can move on to the panel discussion. So this last piece is a promotional video that was made by Norpac, who was one of the major manufacturers of Telidon hardware. And I find the video very hilarious because it's so optimistic and like you'll see, you'll find out hopefully. All right, and so this video is attached to Don Lindsay, who was the artistic director at Norpac at the time in the early 1980s, and Don has gone on to get patents and work in technological development for BlackBerry and Apple. So he started with Telidon and did other things.
1978 was the year when Canadian expertise in information technology made itself known outside Canada's borders with the development of Telidon. This provided the basis for the North American Presentation Level Protocol Syntax, or NAPLIPS. Just as the ASCII standard made an impact on textual communications, the NAPLIPS standard will have an even greater impact on graphic communications. This videotext and teletext standard, implemented in Canada as Telidon, received unanimous approval by Canadian and American standards bodies. Canadian companies continue to lead the way with applications. In the videotext area, Knight Ridder, Times Mirror, Grassroots, and Teleguide all offer interactive or two-way services that include banking, travel and tourism information, official airline guides, electronic encyclopedias, and at-home shopping. In its teletext application, the same NAPLIPS standard plus the delivery mechanism combine to produce the North American Basic Teletext Specification, or NABITS. Teletext, which is broadcast video text, is a one-way service transmitted via broadcast or cable television, either in the vertical blanking interval, called VBI, or on a dedicated channel known as full-channel teletext. Currently, CBC, CBS, and NBC are all running teletext services offering news, weather, sports, stock market and financial information, travel and leisure, and consumer and community information. Broadcast teletext may also be used for program-related services such as captioning for the deaf, allowing text and pictures to be overlaid on the television image.
You get the idea. So you can indulge yourselves watching the full thing on your own time. So yeah, I think we're ready now to launch into a discussion. I think I've spoken enough.
Okay, let's get Scott back.
Yeah, hopefully Scott hasn't fallen asleep.
I also love how the flight information service was all flights canceled. Like that was
Nice.
their Air Canada, all flights canceled. Okay.
I didn't know it was a talk, so I came in to say
Oh,
hello.
hi Dot.
I promised to go to something else, so I came late and I left my and now we're here. Paul had told me about it, but I thought it was like a drop.
Well, thanks
Okay.
for coming.
Dropped in. I'm sorry I missed it.
Oh, that's all
What
right.
I got was fantastic. So look at the thing. Anyway, have a good night.
Scott, are you still there? Or not? Oh,
I am.
yes, okay. Please rejoin us for a little bit of a discussion. And, I realized one other thing I need to just quickly do while we turn over. In the live stream, the projection video is overlaid right here, which means no one will see our heads.
I'm okay with that.
So either we can move forward, or I can just pop back for 1 second and move it out of the way, which is what I'll do.
All right.
Matt, would you tilt your laptop screen down just a little bit so that I can see, not like, I am looking up at the ceiling more than I am looking.
Is that better?
That is excellent, thank
Okay,
you.
nice.
Although it's now, I'm looking at myself on a big screen, which is a form of narcissism I knew I never wanted.
Okay, so now the live stream viewers should be able to see all of us. And hopefully the live stream is okay. We haven't done one in a while, so it may be a little rough, but we'll see how it goes.
Matt, I was hoping before we start you could introduce yourself.
For sure, yeah, and maybe we'll give Scott a second to introduce himself as well.
Sure, you go first though.
Okay, My name is Matt Nishlapidis. I work here in the capacity of art and culture, or art and technology coordinator, which basically means that I work with Scott to bring arts stuff into this space, along with Talia, who's knitting in the audience right there. And I'm also an artist, working with computers and those kinds of things, sometimes to my own dismay. And Scott and I are also research collaborators and do a number of other things here around computing and computer culture in a number of ways. So maybe Scott, introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, so you're in the Center for Culture and Technology, and I direct it. I am an associate professor in the Cinema Studies Institute. I am a profound dilettante. My research interests keep changing, which is great. I think of my job as getting interested in things and then teaching other people how to be interested in those things. And so the work that Matt is talking about for the last 5 years and change, my work has been focused on the history of computing before we knew what shape computing would take. So working on early interactive graphical computing from the 60s, 70s, and very early 80s. And so while I don't know very much about Telidon, and I've seen the show, I have not been able to metabolize the catalog fully, but this is right in my set of interests, and so I'm really grateful to be here.
We'll
Also, Shauna, I want to say I very nearly majored in art semiotics, and adding art to semiotics is perhaps the only way to make it less marketable. And ended up majoring in modern culture and media, which is what they renamed semiotics at my university.
You dodged a bullet there. Okay, that was going to be my first question for you two. If you had, before talking about this event, were you familiar with Telidon beforehand?
That's a good question. I was familiar with it a little bit, mostly because I did my BFA in the new media department at what is now TMU. And there were, at the time, lots of people there who had been involved with InterAccess for many years. One of my professors was Kathleen Puri-Adams, who brought me into InterAccess and actually gave me my first job at a school, where I ended up working at IA when they were still in 401 Richmond. I slept there for a couple weeks at one point, and did all sorts of fun things. And so I'd encountered Telidon as like an abstract idea, maybe seen a few pictures, but had never encountered the work or even really knew much about the work that was done for it until the exhibition a couple years ago.
Awesome.
I saw the exhibition when it was up at InterAccess, and that is, until I got the advanced copy of the catalog and the website, the sum total of what I knew about Telidon. Other than what Matt had explained to me when he was telling me about what was upcoming at InterAccess that was exciting and that I would care about.
Does Telidon remind you of any other systems that you've studied?
It's interesting. So, in fact, there's a kind of interesting distinction between Telidon and the systems that I study, which is that a lot of the systems that I study are vector-based rather than raster-based. So there's a really pronounced distinction between, say, what I think of as early computer films, like John Whitney's vector-based, Arabesque or Matrix, that are these, again, all of that work was really laborious, but where the computer systems that earlier generations of computer artists were working on were grounded not in the raster, the grid, the pixel grid, but rather in effectively the calligraphic displays of a fancy oscilloscope where what you were doing was showing displaying these continuous lines rather than pixels in a grid. And so what's interesting is that Telidon has a very distinct, different aesthetic than some of the earlier computer animations.
Yeah, in our a big part of our work here is actually looking at logo and Seymour Papert's work in the 50s and 60s and up until the 80s, and the whole turtle graphics system, which was also kind of a contemporary of Telidon, and I mean, that's when I first encountered it when I was a kid, and its kind of idea of what computer drawing was much more anchored in a kind of embodied notion of drawing, right? So you move the turtle on the screen and it draws a line behind it, but the turtle moves like a body. You tell it how far to turn and how far to go, and it leaves a trail, which seems really different than the kind of work you were all doing on the Telidon machines, where it's these kind of layers of raster graphics that have to be programmed. So yeah, it's an interesting difference from some of the other systems that we work with.
I think in a sense, can we jump in?
Yeah, of course.
I think in a sense, except that I always approached it as drawing.
Yeah.
Because it was a tablet, and so, you know, the pen is like that, you know,
Yeah,
that's
right.
where you go, and
Yeah.
it's a drawing. And then, as Shauna was describing, you can make parts of that, you can then go, oh, I can animate this by
Right.
putting this over there and putting this over there. So, yeah, like yes and no.
Yeah.
To what you're
Yeah.
saying.
I guess the difference was the,
Hybrid idea.
yeah, definitely. And it sounds like turtle graphics are kind of like what you were doing with the pen, but you program it by issuing instructions to the turtle
I see what you're saying.
rather than drawing it and then manipulating the drawings.
Right.
The raster versus vector was fundamentally driven by the display technology.
Yeah, right.
Because the early vector machines were persistent memory oscilloscopes, as you pointed out there. So they only understood a line moving across a space, and they had no notion of what pixel was lit up or not lit up. Then, as we developed raster-based technology, which was really the result of the lowering cost of memory, you need a lot of memory to support a raster case. So memory comes down. That's why the resolutions are very poor in the early days, because the memory is really, really expensive. And now it's like infinitely fine because memory's cheap. So it was, but you're right that the drawing primitives inside the Telidon protocol are fundamentally vector. But the rendering device at the time was a raster. So you would convert from vector to raster.
I see what you're saying.
The old vector raster debate. There we are.
Still ongoing.
I wanted to ask you, Matt, considering like how difficult it was to resurrect these Telidon works, do you think about the preservation tactics that should be used when you produce artworks, and what folks like 50 years from now would do to look at one of your pieces?
Short answer is no, because I don't know how to even think about that. So, you know, I try to keep the best archives as I can in multiple formats. So, you know, as with a lot of the Telidon work, the thing I can be most sure about surviving is like video or static images. But the actual software itself it's really hard to guarantee that it'll run, you know, forget 50 years from now, 2 years from now. Yeah, it's just kind of, it feels like a full-time job to do that. And, you know, we have organizations like Rhizome who are doing a ton of work on digital art archiving, including like managing a bank of servers running various versions of Windows that you can actually use through their website to view artworks that will no longer run on modern computers. So it's a huge job. It's fascinating, but yeah, it's hard to, as an artist working with technologies, I mean, I already have work that doesn't run anymore. I work on zip disks that I can't load on anything because I don't have a working zip drive because they're infamously flaky, or on CD-ROMs that are decaying. So like I guess for me, I kind of just accept that a lot of this kind of work is ephemeral, and what will be left is the evidence, like the publications or videos or exhibition documentation, maybe more than a lot of the work itself.
I also wanted to open it up to the floor if anyone has any questions about the show or anything else. Hey, we're here to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question for you.
Okay.
I'm interested in how you first got into Telidon. Like, where did that come from?
Yeah. So working at InterAccess, I knew that Telidon was part of the organization's origin story. And I had come across some photo slides that Paul had taken of Telidon works. But that was the only evidence I had that Telidon was a real thing and not just something like some myth that we all agreed on. And then we found this cardboard box full of discs, and that, as I said in the essay, was an outcome of moving from 9 Ossington to 950 DuPont Street. And so we had to pack up the whole archive, and then when we were unpacking it, we were like, no way, that these couldn't be Telidon discs. But then we were instantly confronted with the issue of like, even if we have the discs, we can't watch the work. And so it was just kismet that we connected with John Durno, who had been doing this restoration work on the other side of the country, because he had also inherited some discs. So he had developed a process, and so it was actually rather seamless that we could send him the discs, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So this disc was just for Telidon. It was developed only for Telidon, and the gadget that you put it in, and the viewer, the monitor, they were all just Telidon only.
I think they were universal 8-inch floppies, right?
I think so. Yeah. They're just floppies, but they were 8-inch floppies. Yeah.
We got to separate the problems here. There's archival media versus the representation of content. Telidon is encoded as digital information in a standardized protocol, and it would boggle my mind that there isn't a good interpreter out there to render it today on any device you want. But those digital files are stored on 8-inch floppies, Omega drives.
I have stuff that's on cassette.
Even worse.
Yeah.
But this applies to any kind of digital content, not just Telidon.
Sure, it's just formats that you need to read.
Yeah.
And agreeing on a persistent archival digital storage technology has been a huge challenge. And
Yeah.
the thing the banks and everybody else use now is called digital linear tape, and it's guaranteed to run for 1,000 years. You know, doesn't decay, doesn't get affected by solar radiation and all that kind of crap. That's really expensive, and no one's got that.
and then you also have to maintain the equipment for reading them, and
Yeah.
all of the interpreters to decode the data in whatever format it's been stored in, and
But
yeah.
get the files off your 8-inch drive or your iMoga drive. I mean, one of the core technical concepts of Telidon was it was a highly standardized protocol for encoding that information, and the tools that artists, my wife's an artist, so it's a them, I was thinking, I'm function, she's fluent. The tools you used were all about allowing you to draw in a natural way across a canvas, and then the software problem was to take that drawing and convert it into Telidon's standardized protocol. So that's what actually got saved on the 8-inch drive. And your videotext project was thousands and thousands and thousands of different little snippets of NAPOPS. When you knit together and sequence it, does what you want to do. And my thing was like, don't even do the drawing step, just generate it all on the fly in the computer. Which is easier for things like financial applications and weather and so on.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and I think that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I have a question that I'm like maybe hoping to shift the terrain of the discussion just a little bit, which is I think maybe this is a question both for Shauna and for sort of the Telidon artists and technicians in the room, which is the exhibition is called Remembering the Future. And in the work that Matt and I are doing, we're explicitly inspired by early cinema history. That there's this, the reason why I do what I do, my dissertation supervisor was a historian of early cinema, and he was really interested in like the weird shit people get up to when they don't know what the new technology is for yet. So like what people do with movies in 1897 before the studio system gets elaborated and Hollywood tells us what movies are supposed to be. And so I think of this, of Telidon, of the stuff that Matt and I have been working on. There's a bunch of stuff as these kind of forgotten futures of computing. And so I guess I'm a little bit interested in how people understand that future that we're remembering that didn't come to pass, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, we could talk about it in a bunch of different ways. That this is, I don't know about the computational stuff, but the idioms here, that it's a set-top television thing, that it's in malls and homes, not so that it's not coming from the world of the military or business, but rather coming from sort of more individual or consumer or leisure spaces, would be one thing. Or another thing is that because of the technical limitations, it looks like it's based off a more of a broadcast model where you have a central server and you call in to get the thing, as opposed to the distributed or at least decentralized networks that ARPANET and the internet as we now know it are grounded in. And so I actually just would love to get people's sense of what is this future? And there's also a moment of before the Thatcher, Reagan, Mulroney, neoliberalism moment of a kind of Canadian government investing in its own technologies to build a kind of technological future that's not explicitly market driven. That there are all of these kind of possibilities in Telidon that I'm really curious about how people think about, what is this message from the past for a future that's different than the one we live now? What's the shape of that? And I think, Shauna, because you named the show, I would love to get your sense of what is this future that we're remembering that isn't the future we're living in?
Mm-hmm. Well, I sort of ask the questions, I don't answer them.
I mean, there's also something about the people who were there might have an answer, but that might not actually be the answer that's most interesting to us living now.
I have one kind of answer. So if you recall that we're artists, for me at the time, and this might apply to others, I don't know, I've never really talked to people about this, but it was a way to be, I've been thinking a lot about this because I got invited to do a think back to the early days of the artist-run centers, aka the parallel galleries. Parallel to what? And then I was chatting earlier with, I can't remember who because that happens to me now, about this notion of the underground, were we underground? So I was very immersed in that kind of sense of who I was as an artist, so not in the art system. So that was a future where you were not monopolized by that structure, of whatever, which was, it's not just that it's commercial galleries, but it's more and I don't mean to insult anybody, but it's the taste-making structure, the whole structure of culture, right? So that was part of it for me, an alternative to that, or a parallel, or a different from, or whatever.
That got expressed in the internet. I don't see any difference. I always positioned my experience, my living through Telidon as the internet just a few years before its time.
That was the early internet. I totally
Absolutely,
agree.
everything
when it was open. Yeah.
Everything we did.
Because I remember that too. The very beginning. I remember before the internet.
And your world evolved on a similar, capability. I worked Telidon, and then I worked the .com era.
Yeah.
Same problems, and the semiotics was hugely important. Although we usually hired anthropologists to try and work on the symbology and the communication problem.
Completely non-commercial. Driven by all the users, totally distributed. Yeah.
Well, lack of central authority, I think, is the key concept, and it all depends how much energy you want to put in it. But your tools evolved. I mean, your graphics capabilities all started with CAD/CAM way back in the 60s, and the first systems to draw electronic circuits and that sort of thing started to deal with all the problems of a cursor and a pen and all that stuff, and then they got better and better and better. Same problem, better tools when you hit the web. You're using Corel Draw and Photoshop and all this. It's just like, great-grandpa, grandpa, improvements in that theme of like, what is the human interface between a creative mind and a machine that's going to store a bunch of digital representation information and deliver it to an application, be it to sell stuff or to sell a movie or so on. The only thing that really moved forward from the Telidon days to what we have today is that real-time graphic information is just so much better, whereas this intrinsic limitations of Telidon like made it all so slow that it really wasn't real-time.
But I think as an artist, that's the thing that's interesting about a specific technology versus a generic technology, right? So like what I see in the Telidon work, and I'd love to hear from any of you who worked on it, is the way that artists grapple with the material properties of the medium, right? And so Telidon and a lot of these kind of forgotten future technologies had really specific aesthetic properties because they were specific materials. And it sounded like you were thinking about that when you worked with it.
Very definitely and precisely within those limitations. And I mean, this is all embedded in this work, my media, myself.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that you can really see it in that work because it's all about the thing you want to say, actually say, right?
Yeah.
And you hone in on that thing, and so the pace at which you're working, you deploy that pace to get to your point.
Yeah, and in the year previous to making that work, I had received a research grant from what was then called the Integrated Media section. It became Media Arts. This is like Tom Sherman days, and so I was immersed in researching the social and psychological implications of this advancing technological structure, and how do we deal with this externalized mental model that we project our thoughts onto to understand ourselves and to express. And so that was all kind of bundled up and distilled, actually.
So how do you, so to Scott's question, I'm curious how you were, at the time, how you were imagining what future this was leading to, or like or were you even thinking about that?
Such a good question, but it's really hard. It's really hard to think about.
I don't think that I could have impacted then the way I can now when I think about how the work has been kind of characterized as a prototypical pre-internet selfie, because I'm looking at that, and I can apply what we've learned from then to especially now to the outcome of permeation of that technology and its uses on social media platforms, and the whole idea of influencing or providing information, right? Manufacturing and distributing it all as a at-home cottage industry. So, I'm just seeing the results of all that seedbed of thought coming back out. So I understand this work in related but different evolved terms today.
Yeah, interesting.
I wanted to read a quote from the essay that Jeffrey Shea wrote to attend the Artist Communications exhibition. When he's describing the purpose of that exhibition, he says, the purpose of the exhibition is to provide an objective viewing of the processes and results of working with technology, as well as a chance to explore other writers' and artists' perceptions of what the ideologies embedded in the technology, that is, the degree to which this technology dictates and informs the creative process. So he wrote that 40 years ago, but that's the same project we're working on today. That's what InterAccess does every day. So it's not so much like what has changed in the last 4 decades or what is the alternate future that we're living in. like we're just still asking the same questions.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me about that is that the technologies now have permeated our lives to a point where we're not, I mean, I'm saying we generally as a culture have kind of stopped imagining what they are, right? Like they now are a thing. Whereas in like 1984, they weren't a thing. They were a potential for a lot of things. And so like where we are now is one of those outcomes, right? But I think, you know, artists are not uniquely, but I think are like especially interested sometimes in thinking other than what it is, right? And you know, like you were saying, Nell, about trying to imagine working outside of the like culture industry, but still making art. And like, is this a new opportunity to do that? Does it open up some potential there?
Yeah, well, and on the front of opening up, I think, gee, I mean, because I think some of us, I anyway, have always wanted to kind of get inside the black box. You know, so like, and that's the way to do it, to get your hands on the thing, and you really feel what, you know, you might not know, you might not be able to talk like you, but you really feel the way that it's working, and how it's set up. So what is that? Like, I feel like understanding that tree structure then has brought me to all kinds of places. Like, I got interested in genetic algorithms because I already understood tree structure. So, yeah, it gives you a way to start to penetrate. And today, I mean, don't we need to do that to sort of really try to get into the black box as it gets more and more sophisticated?
And blacker.
Blacker, bigger. You can see
To quote Uncle Marshall, as he is
that's what we call him here.
And I am not actually, I can't do this verbatim, so I'm paraphrasing. But there's something really important about the way that artists bring news about changes in how technologies alter our sense ratios. So the artists are in touch with and doing the work of registering not just the ideological impacts of new technology, but the ways that new technologies are reorienting how we, in a very fundamental way, get a grip on the world. And that artistic practice, aesthetic practice with these technologies is a way of sounding out those changes kind of in real time. So there's a kind of complex overlay of present and future. I mean, one of McLuhan's points is that we aren't even in touch with the present. That we often experience the present as a kind of future, and that the artistic practice, you know, whether it's getting our hands in a black box or other metaphors for the opacity of technology and how we live with it, that it's the kind of practice that y'all were doing in the 80s that helps us really bring into being and make possible a conversation about the changes that are happening in our relationships to technology and McLuhan's term sense ratios. That's, I think, crucial and really important.
And McLuhan's thoughts about the artist as an immunity system.
Yes. Yes.
The things that are emerging today that are kind of, I think, speak to this point are, you know, the TikTok emerging as an alternative to Twitter. You know, they are similar, but they're very different, and they bring a different aesthetic. You know, the TikTok aesthetic is tell me your message in video in 30 seconds or less. Twitter was tell me your message in 130 characters or less. You know, textual, oral versus visual, and so there is a lot of experimentation going on, and then you get Reddit, which is more the political, let's have a dialogue that's uncensored, unfiltered about whatever nonsense we think is going on today. So like, there is a lot of experimentation going on in these different forms now. Are similar but different, and you know what we'll do next week will kind of depend, I think, on what we think the problem is then.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Telidon specifically, I think, is that it was public. So like all of those examples are private. They are. They're owned by a person or a corporation.
The content is not private.
It is on Twitter now. I can't access it without an account because they shut it down.
You might get monetized and you might get censored, but it's the difference between a platform and the content on the platform.
But I do think there's a fundamental difference between a public platform and a commercial platform.
Telidon was never public. The protocols were public, but Torstar ran
Yeah.
the network. Grassroots was Manitoba Tel, which is a great system, by the way. It was never public beyond the degree to which those sponsoring corporations were public.
And it was Algonquin College, wasn't it?
Anybody could take the
Yeah.
and turn up a Telidon server.
Right.
Just as anybody today can create their own web server. Anybody
Right.
can do it.
Yes.
And you can plug into the internet almost unfiltered, but your distribution challenge is huge. Your message will never get
Of course.
outside of your router.
But I mean, the artists, so like, who were working with this stuff then, what was your distribution? Did you care? Did you have distribution? What was the thinking around that? Or how did you feel? How did you think about that at the time, anyway?
Well, after a while, I switched to video.
Yeah, right.
Nice.
Yeah.
I created it in the Telidon, put it on video, and then I could add some soundtracks,
Right.
speech, or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Post it on YouTube.
I'm aware of the time, so I think we should close it out. Scott, I really appreciate your bringing it back to McLuhan. That feels very appropriate.
Something I very rarely do. But
Yeah.
it felt like McLuhan is definitely in the room.
Yeah.
Yes. But thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you all for your attention. And please do check out the exhibition, remembertomorrow.ca, in English and French. Yeah.
Great.
All
Thank
right,
you so
thanks.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
I'll check
Scott.
with you later.